Make sure you guys hit that subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content I'm throwing up. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. And yeah, let's begin.
Okay, so it's not very often that you get these crazy, horrifying Batman stories, right? Like, Batman stories from DC Comics are usually pretty straightforward. There is a crime being committed, and somebody is committing that crime, and Batman's on the hunt to try and figure out who it is, and then some stuff happens, the day is saved, and Batman wins. And then we move on to the next one, and that's usually it. Batman stories are for the most part formulaic. And then Scott Snyder comes along, and he is like, okay, for the last little while, Batman stories have been formulated, so let's not do that. So then you get stories like the Joker has his face cut off by Dollmaster or whatever it is, and then we get the Court of Owls, and then the Joker wages war on the Batman family. He convinces them that all their faces have been cut off. You get these crazy stories, all this wild stuff, and the reason why is because when it comes to telling a story that's horror themed, Scott Snyder is the guy you want. And that's the cool thing about this. Batman the Last Night on Earth, and I know some Grant Morrison fans will be like, no, 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 not a chance. But I kind of like this, because it's like Arkham, a serious house on serious Earth. It's not as crazy as that story, and if you have ever read Arkham, a serious house on serious Earth, that story is nuts. It's the most insane thing ever. It's amazing. But this feels a lot like it. That's what's so cool. And here's the thing. So basically, Batman Last Night on Earth is split into 3 different comics, and each comic is put into multiple parts. So what we're going to do is we're going to start covering the parts individually. It'll give us a better opportunity to discuss the story more in depth than we normally would. But this basically picks up with Batman doing Batman stuff, and this is actually kind of cool. What had happened here was that somebody, over the course of some random period of time, had been doing random chalk outlines, right? And it wasn't really chalk outlines, it was really just chalk on streets, or on the side of a building, and none of it seemed to make any sense. It was just like some anonymous person that was doing what is essentially considered street art, and nobody really knew what to think of it. The difference is that all the Banksy stuff is awesome, but with this, they were just random chalk marks, and nobody had any clue or any idea what was going on. And what ended up happening here is Batman had essentially used his data to compile all these pictures together, and when he did, presumably using whatever items were there, it turned out to be a point or a giant picture of Batman, or a Batman chalk outline, with Batman dead, and right in the middle of it, where his heart would be. In the middle of all that is Crime Alley, where Batman's parents were murdered. This is when it gets really cool. So what ends up happening is Batman basically tracks it down to its location, where this mark is on Crime Alley, where his parents were shot, and then he gets there. There's this young kid on his knees, basically holding an umbrella, and when Batman moves back, this kid, whoever he may be, is just sitting there all zombified, presumably decomposing. And what Batman does is he trips a trap. Essentially, there's a gun there which fires a shot at Batman and presumably kills him. Like, of course he's talking to Alfred, and he's like, hey man, I don't know what's going on, and Alfred is just like, dude, you need to move, and so on and so forth. And then Batman gets shot and suddenly wakes up in a white room. And this again is where Snyder really shines, right? Like, Snyder, when it comes to stories, Scott Snyder is, and I know I sound like a Snyder fanboy, but I don't even care right now. Scott Snyder is so good at moving the story one direction and then yanking the rug right out from under you. That's one of the reasons why Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's art work so well together, is because it's so interesting and so unique. And so if you've ever read Witches, for example, you get like pledged, pledged. You think you know what's going on until you don't, until something else is totally going on. And that's the cool thing about this. This is because Bruce Wayne wakes up here, and he's basically in the company of a doctor, and the doctor is like, hey man, it's cool, everything's fine, this is the first time in so many years that you haven't been tricked, and you seem to be lucid, and you seem to be awake. I'm your Dr. Redmond Hood, and you've been here essentially 20 years. I've been your doctor ever since you've been moved here to Arkham Asylum. And it's like, what? Batman in Arkham Asylum? Scott Snyder is playing on the notion that Batman's crazy, and he always has been. And it's just, honestly, I want to say there was a fan fiction out there or something like that may have been similar or akin to this, but this is an awesome idea, because this guy, Redmond Hood, is obviously a play on Red Hood, and not even Jason Todd Red Hood, but just by going based on physical appearance, the original Red Hood, the Joker. And so it's like, you look at this guy, Redmond Hood, and it's like, okay, so he's the Joker. And it's interesting because what seems to be going on here is, like, of course, when Alfred shows up, Alfred starts talking to him, and Bruce Wayne starts going on about all these things, like, you have to get me out of here, I have to get back to fighting crime, I have to get back to doing all these things. And when Alfred talks to him, he's just like, look man, I guess I'll take you home, and no one blames you for what happened. Everything's okay. It's not your fault. The city doesn't blame you. Nobody blames you. Everything's cool. And when the question is, what are you talking about? That's when Alfred realizes that while Batman's woken up, he doesn't seem to really understand what's going on. And that's when he basically drops this big bombshell that Bruce Wayne, Batman, killed his own parents. And it's just wow. It's so awesome to see this because, man, this is ridiculous. And that's when Bruce is, no, that's not true. Where's Alfred? Where is Alfred? What's going on here? And that's when Alfred flings open this curtain and shows us all these different people that would traditionally be Batman villains. Like, you basically have a guy that looks like Bane or could be Killer Croc. We're not actually given a name for him. Harleen Quinzel, Harley Quinn. A guy that looks like the Mad Hatter. When Alfred shows us all these guys to Bruce, like, these are your orderlies. These are people who are presiding over the hospital. They're doctors. These are people who are here to help you. But when you see them, all you do is fight them because all you see is the Mad Hatter. You see Harley Quinn. You see your doctor as the Joker. You see Bane or Killer Croc. Whatever you see, Scarecrow. You don't see anybody for who they are. You see them for who you think they are. This illusion that you're living in, this illusion that you've created for yourself, all people want to do is help you. You see them as villains. And so it's kind of nuts because it's kind of like Bruce doesn't seem to be able to let go of the fact that nothing he believes is real. In his mind, he is Batman. In his mind, he is fighting crime in Gotham City. And in his mind, something's going on here, like he's basically being tricked or he's being duped, being lied to, or something along those lines. And this is awesome because for those of you guys who never read New 52 Batman, this is exactly what it feels like. It's Court of Owls. It's all this kind of different stuff. It's all these stories, and it feels like 2011 Scott Snyder writing Batman. It is amazing, because then of course he ends up in this padded room, and when he wakes up in his mind, it's the Batcave. He's like, come on, there's got to be a way out of here. There's got to be an opening. When he reaches inside and he pulls out just what it looks to be a giant dinosaur, but instead it's just two little objects. It's nothing like what we're familiar with. It's not the giant dinosaur or the giant penny. What we're familiar with is not what it actually seems to be. He just pulls out these tiny little objects, and that's essentially it. The Batman, or everything we've grown to see in the Batman mythos, the Batcave, with all these fantastic forms of technology, with Batman running around with a cloak and cowl, and the Joker jumping into a scheme, all these things we would normally expect from the Batman mythos isn't there. None of it's real. Batman's just a crazy person. That's all he is. Bruce Wayne is just a crazy guy who believes that he's Batman, and it makes sense. That's why this story is so good, because it works. I mean, at the end of the day, what's the difference between Batman and the Joker? You look at the Joker and say the Joker's crazy, right? He's a crazy guy. His schemes make sense to him and him alone. But is Batman really that different? I mean, let's kind of look at the story for what it is. Let's look at the nature of Batman for what it is. Some kid who's the child of super wealthy individuals is walking out of some event. They're murdered in a robbery gone wrong. He loses his mind. He experiences this insane amount of guilt. And then he in turn rationalizes the best way to not necessarily get revenge for his parents' murders, but to honor their memory, is to dress up as a bat in the middle of the night after teaching himself all these wild forms of martial arts, to dress up as a bat in the middle of the night and track down criminals and beat them up. That makes sense to him. A man with a sound mind said, I can fight crime in my city by dressing as a rodent. You look at that for what it is, and it's like only a crazy person would do that. How serious would you take someone who is running on rooftops in real life that hits the newsfeed? Some guy in like Chicago is running around dressed as a bat and beating people up. You would laugh at it. You would be like, well, that's crazy. I mean, we're not talking about superheroes in Washington State. Those guys are legit. Everybody knows the story of Phoenix Jones, and everybody knows that Phoenix Jones is probably one of the greatest human beings to ever live, and he is a god among men. We understand that, but in terms of people who are normal and don't have powers and are not incredibly awesome, if you have never looked up Phoenix Jones, that guy is actually really, really cool. He's an air martial artist that goes around and just patrols the areas, and people love him. Dude, Phoenix Jones is one of the coolest society has to offer. And I think he was the one who actually started the trend of people dressing up as superheroes and actually trying to engage by keeping their neighborhood safe. But in all reality, if you've ever heard of somebody that is doing what Batman did, we would chalk them up as a crazy person. And so you look at these two things and it's like, okay, so it makes sense that Batman's a crazy person. It makes sense that Bruce Wayne is a crazy person who believes he can dress as a bat and fight crime and somehow fix the city. It's kind of interesting because then you transition to this conversation between himself and Alfred. And Alfred kind of sits down with him and says, okay, I'm going to try something here. Like Dr. Hood said that it would be, or it might be a dangerous idea, but for what it's worth, I'm going to try it out. But I need to try this, and it's kind of cool because then Bruce starts asking these questions that you would expect him to. Well, how is it that I speak all these different languages? And how is it that I know all these different forms of martial arts? And it's basically these questions, and Alfred is just because you taught yourself. You taught yourself all these different languages. It's because you learned it from the librarian, a guy named Elliot, who you have been, for some reason, calling Hush. And we're like, okay, so that's a reference to Thomas Elliot. You look at these things, and it's like, okay, this works. This is actually cool. And so Alfred basically breaks out the Batman uniform that Bruce Wayne has presumably been wearing whenever he believed he was Batman. And it's a straitjacket with a Batman cowl. And it just keeps getting deeper and deeper. And I mean, we're getting in deep waters. And we're kind of left with this idea that Batman is truly actually insane, and that none of this really seems to be real. And so Alfred extending this to Batman, and Bruce Wayne says, well fine, I need to be Batman. I'm gonna need that suit back because I have to go and be Batman. And it's like Shutter Island, right? Like if any of you guys have saw Shutter Island, and I won't give spoilers, but the ending of Shutter Island is almost what this seems to be, and it's amazing, and it's awesome, because you go through this, like Alfred kind of seems to be dropping some hints, and Alfred almost seems to be letting off these little indications that maybe Bruce Wayne is right, and maybe Bruce Wayne is not actually insane as he's been led to believe, but actually something is really going on here. But what that thing is, we'll have to wait for the next video. With that being said, guys, I'm going to bring this video to an end, and if you are new here to Comics Expanded, make sure you hit that sub button to make sure you become part of the channel, and make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all in the next one. Peace!